It's just I really appreciate the warm introduction and just how you grounded us, and it's an honor and humbling to share this space with all of you. So thank you so much for the welcome, and I really appreciate being with you. I wish we could all be in person, but this is the next best thing. I'm going to share my screen, and you can tell me, can you see this Google slide presentation? Yes, great. So I'll start that. Um, so I want to talk today about this overture, Peace and Justice through Just and Peaceful Means, overture on embargoing Israel. This is an overture that I wrote last fall, I think September, October, and it's really coming from three places, three overlapping places. One is just my striving and often failing to follow Jesus as a Christian. My work for the last almost 20 years in the movement for Palestinian rights, particularly within the Presbyterian Church, and with the Palestine Justice Network of the Presbyterian Church. And then the third is really as someone who has traveled to Palestine. I've had the privilege of doing so numerous times. And each time, sadly, it's the conditions are worse on the ground. But I nevertheless come back filled with inspiration and motivation and conviction to do something about it. So I wrote this overture, which I'm hoping your presbytery will I'm sure your presbytery will thoughtfully and prayerfully consider, and I'm hoping this will go to General Assembly. Um, so what would this overture do? I'm quoting here directly from the overture itself. This would direct the PCUSA stated clerk and Office of Public Witness to demand the U.S. Congress and President enact a full trade embargo on Israel until the United Nations determines the following conditions are met. The Israeli military occupation of Palestinian territory has ended. Israel's apartheid policies are abolished. Israel's illegal separation barrier is demolished, and Palestinian refugees are granted the right to return to their homeland. And each of those points are points that the Presbyterian Church has endorsed as worthwhile aspirations. And second, the overture would encourage presbyteries, congregations, and individual clergy and lay people to call upon their Congress members and president to impose a full trade embargo on Israel until the United Nations determines the conditions listed above are met. So, what would a full trade embargo on Israel look like? Well, it would resemble U.S. sanctions placed on South Africa in 1986, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is not something new, of course, in the life of international geopolitics. Um, it's a form of international sanctions, in this case, placed against Israel, and it would prohibit exports, American companies from exporting products to or importing products from Israel. And this is, again, the same model that was used for the sanctions against South Africa. It would also limit bank loans to an investment in Israel. Um, so, does the Presbyterian Church lobby the U.S. government? Quite simply, yes. We have a whole office, a dedicated staff of really amazing people in the Presbyterian Church Office of Public Witness who have been doing this sort of advocacy since 1946, in fact. So 80 years, they have represented the church in lobbying Congress for policy that matches our values as Presbyterians. They describe their work as advocating and helping the church to advocate and advocating and helping the church to advocate the social witness perspectives and policies of the General Assembly. And so often when the General Assembly passes an overture, the Office of Public Witness will then take that as a marching order and will both meet with Congress members and or at least offices of Congress members, but often Congress members themselves, to advocate for a particular policy change. And they'll also send out email alerts, maybe some of you get them, to everyone on the Presbyterian Church mailing list. And it'll say, contact your congressperson and ask them to vote for this legislation or vote against that legislation. And this overture would essentially set that office of public witness into motion. When I was writing this overture, I shared it with a bunch of people in Louisville who are, and also in this office of public witness. And while they couldn't say, yes, we endorse this, no, we don't think this is a good overture, they said, this is the appropriate way to do it, to have the office of public witness and the stated clerk to do this advocacy. So why should we pass this overture? Well, first, our church partners are asking us to advocate for sanctions, and they have been for quite some time. This is just a relatively small collage of people that we've been working for who represent different organizations, um, American, Palestinian, Israeli, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, all of whom have advocated for sanctions against Israel, as in addition to boycotts and divestment. Um, and they've been saying this for quite some time. And one of the things that keeps me in the church, one of the things that makes me Presbyterian, despite the tempting call from the Mennonite church down the road that I keep attending, but one thing that keeps me coming back to the Presbyterian church is that we do mission in partnership. In other words, the sort of work that we do out in the world is not top down, us saying in sort of some colonial way, this is what you need to liberate yourselves. We listen to our partners, and we listen to our partners and take orders from them. And in this case, principally, we listen to our Palestinian partners, both Christian and Muslim. And these are just some of the organizations that are represented by our partners. Kairos Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine, Sabeel, Jewish Voice for Peace, Friends of Sabeel North America, Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace, all of whom have been asking us as a denomination to advocate for sanctions, and they themselves, where possible, are advocating for the sorts of sanctions that this overture would put in place. In 2009, all of the Palestinian Christian representatives of all the Palestinian Christian denominations got together and they released a statement called Kairos Palestine, a Moment of Truth. And this was a call to the rest of the world to act in this Kairos moment. And among many other things, and I recommend reading the whole document if you haven't, they said, and I quote here, "We call for a response to what the civil and religious institutions have proposed, the beginning of a system of economic sanctions and boycott to be applied against Israel. We repeat once again that this is not revenge, but rather a serious action in order to reach a just and definitive peace that will put an end to Israeli occupation of Palestinian and other Arab territories and will guarantee security and peace for all." And our church General Assembly voted to prayerfully study this Kairos document. The Palestine Justice Network, which at that time was called the Israel-Palestine Mission Network, produced a study guide, which you can still get from our website, to study how we faithfully can respond to this call from our siblings in Palestine. Just recently, in November 2025, the same folks and many others got together in Palestine, all of the Christian denominations again, a number of civil society organizations, and they reissued a call for many of the same things that they did in 2009 in a new document called Kairos Palestine 2, A Moment of Truth, Faith in a Time of Genocide. And again, I recommend reading that whole document, or you can use the study guide that Nushin and many others helped to put together. I think Shannon, you worked on it as well, called the same title, A Moment of Truth, Faith in a Time of Genocide, which you can get from the PJN website for free. And I'll quote from this as well. The document says, "We value the global movements of resistance, advocacy, and popular pressure that work to hold governments and international bodies accountable, isolating Israel through boycotts and sanctions until it complies with international law. We view this from a moral perspective. The strategies of boycotts, divestment, and sanctions are, in our view, effective forms of creative resistance rooted in the logic of love and nonviolence as affirmed in our original document. And so this is an urgent call, an urgent cry from our siblings, our Christian siblings in Palestine, to use boycotts and divestment and to advocate for sanctions. So, why should we pass this overture? Well, as I mentioned before, it worked in South Africa. The PCUSA General Assembly advocated for sanctions, specifically called for comprehensive sanctions in 1983, 1985, and again in 1986. And they were not alone in doing this. Many other denominations and civil society organizations, labor unions, institutions of higher education all called upon the US government to issue comprehensive sanctions against South Africa, a full trade embargo, a ban on bank loans, a mandate that American companies would need to pull their investments from South Africa. This was the call. And in October 1986, as many of you know, the US Congress overrode President Reagan's veto to pass the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act. And the Senate was Republican controlled, so it was a little bit watered down from the original call for a full trade embargo, but it was still comprehensive and significant um, materially bound sanctions against South Africa. And this is really what, among many other things that were happening in South Africa and around the world, this really set the ball rolling to end apartheid. And just 4 years later, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. The African National Congress was freed from their ban, and the mechanisms of apartheid began to be dismantled. And in 1994, as you know, um, the democratic elections were held in South Africa for the first time. And I was just reminded earlier tonight that it's today, February 11th, 1990, that Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Um, so I think we can look beyond those sorts of rationales, and I think we need to talk, and we're going to hear more from Nushin about this, but we have an ongoing genocide happening in Gaza. More than 500 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the so-called ceasefire. And this is on top, of course, the at least 70,000 Palestinians who were killed in Gaza. And that figure, by the way, has now been confirmed by the Israeli military. The Israeli military has acknowledged that, yes, they have killed at least 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza, and this includes at least 20,000 children. And I could go into the gruesome details of the genocide, but I imagine Nashin's going to talk about this some more. But this is not just something that is in the news that we can sort of feel bad about and then go on to the next thing. This is happening, and it's happening in large part because our government is allowing it to happen, and the corporations that do business here and do business there are allowing it to happen and profiting from it. And so, as Christians, as Americans, as human beings, we really do need to respond to this, and we need to respond to it in bold, prophetic ways. Meanwhile, in the West Bank and in Jerusalem and in Israel, we are seeing extreme oppression of Palestinians, unprecedented levels of abuse, violence, and oppression. And I'll just go through some of these. And most of these are not new, they're just heightened to a new level. Um, if we look at the whole land of historic Palestine, what Palestinians call Palestine, what Israelis call Israel, what the international law calls Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, whatever we call it, we see different laws and rights for different people. Jewish Israelis have a full slate of human rights, just as people and citizens of full democracies have. Palestinians who live in Israel have about 65 laws that explicitly discriminate against them. Palestinians in Jerusalem are treated legally as foreign residents of Jerusalem, even if their families have been there for hundreds of years. Palestinians in the West Bank live under Israeli military law. and have virtually no democratic rights whatsoever. And Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, of course, even before the genocide, were living in an open air prison where the guards were all Israeli soldiers. And so this differentiation of different laws for different people is what led Palestinians and many international human rights organizations and eventually the Presbyterian Church to recognize that this is an apartheid country. This is an apartheid situation. And as such, it's a crime against humanity. Recently, we've seen an increase of settler attacks against Palestinians. If you look at the graph down here at the bottom, in the last couple of years, really since 2021, not even October 2023, we are seeing just skyrocketing numbers of Palestinians being attacked by Israeli settlers. And if you look at this photograph right here, you'll notice there are people in plain clothes, like this guy with a machine gun, this guy with some sort of rod, it looks like, and those are Israeli settlers. These guys here are Israeli soldiers, also have machine guns. This is not an uncommon scene. Israeli soldiers are joining and backing and protecting Israeli settlers who are attacking Palestinians and driving them out of their villages. And so we see entire villages erased and people, their houses burned, their cars burned. And this is happening on an almost daily basis, really under the radar of the Western media. At the same time, and much this is connected, we see just a skyrocketing construction of Israeli settlements, both of the so-called illegal kind, like the one you see in this picture, these outposts, and of the ones that look like this, the sort of legal ones that are gain approval from the Israeli government. But it really doesn't matter because when settlers come and they drop a trailer on top of a hill in the West Bank, the Israeli military comes to protect them. And then the Israeli military builds a trailer because they're going to be there for a while. And then they hook it up to electricity. And then before you know it, it looks like this. And this is a pattern that's been happening for years, for decades. But as you can see from these graphs, it's just been skyrocketing for the last couple years. And just this week, you may have heard in the news, the Israeli government, was it yesterday? It was yesterday or the day before, the Israeli government passed a law that it will enable Israelis to almost entirely freely buy property anywhere in the West Bank, which even as the Israeli finance minister Bezalel Smotrich said, this will put the two-state solution to what did he say? He said this is going to kill the two-state solution finally, something like that. I'm paraphrasing, and so we're seeing the West Bank just any distinction between Palestinian territory and Israeli settlements being erased, and Palestinians being driven out of their homes and villages, and Israeli settlers taking their place. And of course, Israeli settlers who live in the West Bank, even though they are just living in the West Bank is illegal under international law because it's Palestinian territory, they are protected by full Israeli civil rights, protected by all Israeli laws that would protect any civilians. And so you can have a Israeli citizen and a Palestinian citizen living side by side, and if they commit the same crime, the Palestinian goes to military court where there's something like a 97% conviction rate, and the Israeli goes through the Israeli civil court and has the full right of legal representation and jury, etc. We also we've been seeing an increase in home demolitions, Palestinian home demolitions. This is again something that's been happening for decades, but at unprecedented levels in the last few years. This top picture is a picture I took when I was in the West Bank with Nushin and many others, Mary, and Mary's daughter Emma. And when we were driving by deep in the West Bank, our Palestinian guide, noticed that there were these bulldozers here. And he said, those are Israeli soldiers in those bulldozers. It's a Caterpillar bulldozer, by the way, one of the companies that we divested from as a church. And they were bulldozing Palestinian farmland to make way for Israeli settlements. And so our delegation, all almost all Presbyterian clergy and lay people. We got out of the van following the lead of our Palestinian hosts, and we stood witness to this. And once we stood there, we were singing. The bulldozers stopped. A huge phalanx of Israeli soldiers came, and then they pushed us off of the land and they kept digging. And this is happening on a daily basis, the destruction of Palestinian land for the purpose of replacing it with Israeli settlements. This picture here on the bottom, this is a picture that Nushin took of a man in East Jerusalem who just 2 days before we visited him, his home was demolished, and you can see the remains of it behind there. And just, I think it was today or yesterday, more homes on his same street were demolished without any reason other than he's Palestinian and he didn't have a permit to build his home, even though his family had been living there for generations. And this is a map that just shows you, in a graph that shows you the increase of home demolitions in the West Bank. We also have ongoing deprivation of water of Palestinians in the West Bank, and even more so in Gaza. Israelis control the water for the entire land, and Israelis have swimming pools and sprinklers in their lawns and can drink as much water as they want, whereas Palestinians have a very limited amount of water. And if you go to the West Bank, you can tell which buildings are Palestinian versus which are Israeli settlements, because the Palestinian buildings all have water tanks on the top. And that's because their water supply is regularly cut off, and so they depend on this extra water that they might have in a tank above their home. There are also checkpoints which have been in the West Bank since the occupation began in 1967, but even more so in the last few years. You really can't go 10 miles down the road without passing through a military checkpoint. And these checkpoints are not just a nuisance. They not only make a 10-minute drive into sometimes a 2-hour drive, but they're quite humiliating as well. I've heard so many stories of Palestinians who were maybe passing through a checkpoint with their family, and the soldiers would say something like, okay, well, if you want to pass through, get on your hands and knees and bark like a dog. Or they would have the father of a family strip down to his underwear to try to humiliate him in front of his family before they may or may not let him pass through. And this is just what one of these checkpoints looked like. Just, very dehumanizing, sort of cattling everybody in and pushing them along, or sometimes not pushing them along. And then there's also the ongoing separation barrier, which was supposed to divide the West Bank from Israel according to Israel's aims. But as you can see, this red line is where it was actually constructed, and the green line is the internationally recognized boundary between the West Bank and Israel. And so as it has snaked well into the West Bank, it has also captured more and more Palestinian territory. So if you were Palestinian and you owned land here, you would lose it. And you would not be able to gain access to it. There are a few cases where, like, a farmer has a house here and a farmland there, and they need to get a permit every single time they go to their farmland from the Israeli military. Some of us met a woman in Bethlehem who has a shop right across the street from the separation barrier, and she needs a permit from the Israeli military if she wants to go to the roof of her house. And she's been to the roof of her house and been shot at when she didn't have a permit. The separation barrier is also this space of political and creative expression. And this is a spot near the Ida refugee camp near Bethlehem, where in 2014, Palestinians asked us to divest. And I think I'm showing this here because I think it's a good reminder that Palestinians are paying attention to what we're doing as a church and as Americans. And then since 1948, Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed from their homeland, and this is about 800,000 people in 48, and then all of their descendants since then, they are still to this day denied their right to return to their homeland. And this is the majority of the Palestinian population are now refugees who live in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Gaza and the West Bank, and some abroad. And as this woman shows here, many of them still have the keys to their homes. But they, despite the United Nations ruling that they have a right to return to their homeland, the Israeli government has not allowed them to return. We also see an increase of mass incarceration of children and adults. This is a photograph I took in Jerusalem, right outside of the Damascus Gate. And this boy here, he couldn't be more than 15 or 16 years old. I watched, and I should have just taken a video. I was not thinking on my toes. I took a picture instead, surreptitiously, and I watched this soldier take his ID, search him, head to toe, and then they brought him into this little booth here, and then I saw the soldier just hit him really hard, and the kid went down, and I didn't see him get up again. And again, this is happening on a daily basis. Kids, adults are being arrested. More than 10,000 Palestinians have been arrested, most without any charge. They're being held under an Israeli law called administrative detention, which enables them to hold people without charging them of a crime. Those who have been charged, as I said before, there's a close to 100% conviction rate. And in Israeli prisons, especially in the last few years, Palestinians have been systematically tortured and sexually assaulted. And this is shown in evidence by many human rights organizations, including B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, which put together this really horrifying report called Living Hell, where they took testimony of Palestinian prisoners, as well as Israeli guards who would speak up on the condition of anonymity. And just they detail the just horrible conditions that Palestinians are enduring in the Israeli prisons. And Nushin and Mary and I heard from the family members of some of these prisoners, and just the stories that they tell are just really terrifying. And then finally, we have the criminalization of nonviolent protest. This right here is the Great March of Return in Gaza, which happened in 2019, in 2018 and 2019, where thousands of unarmed Palestinians protested against the siege on Gaza, and they were shot at with live gunfire from Israeli military. They killed about 220 people, injured thousands of people. And I think we should keep that in mind when we rightfully condemn armed violence. It's that nonviolent protest is criminalized and met with violence. So just finally, some people have asked, will sanctions against Israel hurt Palestinians? These are the same sorts of questions that were asked in South Africa. And South Africans said not as much as the apartheid will hurt us. And again, these are the same slides as I showed before. Palestinians are asking us to issue sanctions, and so we need to trust them. They know what's going on. They know how they will be impacted by these, and we need to listen to and trust our Palestinian partners. So that's all. Sorry for taking so much time. Thank you very much. And if there is any time for questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But if there's not, that's okay too.